I have a framework that I use when I look at the future work. It's simple, complicated, and complex. Simple is a recipe. Complicated is parking a car, and complex is raising a child. If your job is basically knowledge management, that's pretty easy to do from a technology point of view.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Atomic Conversations. I'm Sajeesh Sahadevan, and today we'll discuss a topic that's been hard to avoid lately, especially if you're in IT: artificial intelligence. We wanted to learn more about the role of AI in IT, the apprehensions around it, and some of the challenges that IT leaders had been grappling with. So we collaborated with ITSM.tools to put together a report titled State of AI in IT. In this first edition, we cover North America, especially US and Canada. And to discuss the data and insights from the report, we have with us Stephen Mann and Alan Berkson.
We have Stephen and Alan with us. Just a little bit of introduction about Stephen to start with. Stephen is the principal analyst and content director at ITSM.tools. He's also the founder. And ITSM.tools, if you're not aware, is an ITSM-focused industry analyst firm. He's also an independent IT and ITSM marketing content creator, a blogger, writer, and a presenter on the challenges and opportunities of ITSM. Over his career, he's held positions in IT research and analysis, most notably Forrester and the UK Post Office. Alan is a technology pioneer, entrepreneur, angel investor, and startup advisor. He was an early employee at Freshworks, a SaaS company focused on business software, where he had multiple roles, including the director of community outreach, building the analyst relations program, and now the director of thought leadership. As the first employee hired outside of India, Alan has been a key member of the leadership team, helping grow Freshworks from a startup to a global public company. Prior to Freshworks, he spent over 2 decades in the IT world doing development, service management, and as a pioneer in the managed service provider MSP space. Hey, Stephen. Hey, hi, Alan.
Hey, Sajeesh. Hey, Stephen. Good to see you.
Likewise, great to have you both here. So let's start with the objective of putting together this report. Essentially, we noticed that there was a lot of apprehension, questions, and curiosity around using AI in IT. We needed to understand quite a few things, and we noticed that so did the IT community. So we wanted to gather some data from the community to help them benchmark themselves by studying their peers, and also inform their strategy for adopting AI within IT and go into 2024 with an informed view of what's going on out there. For the study, we surveyed a total of a bit over 1,000 participants. We surveyed over 250 IT professionals to understand their take on using AI and their challenges with AI. We thought that a business perspective was also important. So we surveyed 750 end users or employees of the organization to understand what they might be using AI tools for and what their general perspective is for their IT organization. Now, the images that you're looking at are roughly from the same time, right? So you might recognize the image on the right. It's from 2007 when Steve Jobs launched the first iPhone. But what you might not know, or some of you might be too young to even remember, is the image on the left is Microsoft Surface that was launched in the same year. So you might know Microsoft Surface as this tablet PC, but the very first version was this elaborate coffee table that was touchscreen, and you could sit across from your buddy and play chess and put your phone on the table, and it would just like help you manage pictures, and it used to do the same with digital cameras. But it turned out it was just too impractical for its time. It looked cool. I was in awe of it back when I was working. I was doing support for Microsoft. And it was just too bulky and impractical to be used. And the same touchscreen in a phone in a portable format that could fit in your pocket uh, has outlasted it by decades. So what, just to pull the analogy back to the present topic, there's been a lot of technological buzzwords that we've been hearing lately, right? There's Web3, there's blockchain, all sorts of NFTs. But AI is clearly different from all of these, right? So people talk about these other technologies and they think it's important, but they don't understand the practical applications. And for those reasons, they haven't lasted very long. AI, although comes with its own share of risks, and we need to be cautious about it, but everyone is clear about the value that AI brings to the table, right? So, Alan, let's start with you. I'd like to understand what's your take on what makes AI different from all of these other trends that we heard about lately.
I think that if I start with, is there a application? If you look at this picture, the iPhone was not innovation in terms of technology. It used existing technology. It was a innovation in terms of the user experience and the user interface. It was a practical application of a lot of the technology that had been around for a while. And I think that one of the challenges with blockchain is it was sort of a solution looking for a problem. What we see with AI, look, AI is not new. LLMs are not new. They've been around a long time. But what we saw in the last year is a breakthrough user experience. ChatGPT made a segment or a small portion of the value of AI available to the public, and as a usability factor. The value factor still remains to be seen, but the usability factor is there. So I think that's the biggest difference, is that there's a breakthrough usability case.
That's great. I agree. The user experience and usability are just so intuitive with ChatGPT, particularly. Stephen, what's your take? What have you seen within AI or Gen AI in particular that feels more long term?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with, and it's probably the wrong word, I wanted to use a word like tangibility, and of course it's not, but it feels like something we can use as people in our day-to-day roles. So if we take blockchain that you just mentioned, most of us don't really see how it's going to help us, even though it will, maybe behind the scenes. But with something like Gen AI in particular, we can all go to ChatGPT, whether it's the free one or the paid one, and we can get it to help us. I mean, it might be a case, at least in the short term, of us thinking, how is this technology going to make our lives easier, rather than how is this technology going to help the business as a whole. But it's been able to, whether it's grab our imagination or embedding itself in the way that we work. And as we'll see from the stats, so many of us are already using it. Whether we're using it for the right reasons or not is debatable, and we can get onto that. But it just did have that stickiness that allowed us to think that it was something that was worthwhile focusing on. It is amazing how different companies, because you've got Sony with the mini disc as well, probably around about the same time or slightly earlier, how one solution was just so dominant compared to others. And we might touch on it again later on, that as part of the survey process, we did ask people which generative AI tool they were acquainted with, and I think it was something like 74% for ChatGPT. This is end users, by the way, not the IT professionals. And the next highest was 4% for Bard. So it really has become part of the collective consciousness, and people are aware of it, even if they've not actually tried to use it. Although I'd be willing to bet that most people have had a tinker, if only to find out what a bit like when you go to Google and you Google yourself, they're just doing it in a self-serving way.
Great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, tangibility is also another factor, right? Blockchain might have applications in not just currency, but also decentralizing banking, for instance, and, adding a layer of security. And ChatGPT just feels so tangible that the value is just immediate, right? Now, before we dive into the data from the study, this is something that Alan, I'm sure you would have a lot of interesting insights into it. If you notice, this is the hype cycle from Gartner for AI in particular. If you notice at the very peak of inflated expectations, you can see Gen AI. And Alan, I've heard you say that we're right now in the trough of disillusionment. And would you like to explain why you think that way?
Yeah, I would say that this slide is already dated. I think Gen AI has moved further along the hype cycle here. The fun part that the tangibility that Stephen was talking about, that clearly is there. My daughter needed to write a cover letter for a job, and she just graduated college and never done it before. So she goes into ChatGPT and says, write me a cover letter for a recent college graduate trying to get a job doing whatever. And it gives you something credible. And so that's a tangibility. But in particular, Gartner's thinking about businesses, and I think we're going to talk about it a little later. There are a myriad of challenges in terms of security, privacy, governance, copyright. I mean, where's the data coming from? These ideas of what they call hallucinations and being able to consistently deliver value. So it jumped over into the consciousness of consumers because it has some tangible value. I'm going to continue to use that word, Stephen. But I think that in order to be business ready, now the real work has to happen in terms of thinking about all the risk management that has to happen along with it. So I think it's going to be a longer period of time before the bigger value is going to come out. But we're on the right track.
Great. Stephen, would you like to add on to it based on what you've seen?
What I love about the Gartner hype cycle is not all the little data points on it, but just the cycle itself, that we do tend to get excited about new technologies, particularly if we work in IT. And then you do get to that peak of inflated expectations. But then the reality kicks in where you've done your research, you might even have done your pilots, and you have to do something real about it in production. And that's where we get into the trough of disillusionment. And I think a lot of organizations are finding that it's actually far more difficult than either they thought or perhaps were told or sold. That, while it's great, coming back to Alan's example, if you want to create an email or a letter or whatever, you can get a good 80, if not 90, 95% of what you need from something like ChatGPT. But if you're using it, and this is probably at the other end of the spectrum, to make important business decisions, then you do end up in a tricky situation whereby you actually need to do a lot more of the thinking yourself, or you need to have the experiences to complement what a tool like ChatGPT is telling you. And I think that's where a lot of organizations are either starting to worry or in fact becoming unstuck, in that things aren't necessarily as specific as they need them to be. It's a little bit like, I sometimes review articles that come into ITSM.tools, and you can tell the difference between one that has been written by somebody who knows what they're talking about and somebody who has probably lent on ChatGPT more than they should have done, because you can spot the errors based on their lack of knowledge in the topic. And for me, that's a real danger or a real risk that is quite rightly putting organizations into that trough of disillusionment, in addition to the fact that it's probably far, far harder than they thought it was going to be to get something like a GenAI tool working for them or working for the employees of the organization.
Makes sense, makes a lot of sense. And what both you and Alan mentioned in terms of the accuracy, and Alan, you used the word hallucination. I think that perfectly describes some of the responses that sound credible because ChatGPT has access to a lot of data, and perhaps in your past usage you might have seen or learned quite a few new things. But yeah, so it's probably not ready for business use just yet, but it remains to be seen. The newer versions of GPT are more grounded, and I'm sure over time some uh, domain-specific LLMs would come by that take into account organization-specific data, and basically it's a walled garden where the extent to which you ground it within certain constraints or within let's say the knowledge base of the business can be defined by the admin or the user of the tool. And now let's look at some of the data from the study. This is just a basic split of the demographics. In terms of gender, we almost had uh, a half and half split, so 45% female contribution and 55% male IT professionals. We focused on the US and Canada specifically for this edition. So we, not surprisingly, we got over 80% responses from the US and 17% from Canada. Now let's look at perhaps the most important data point from the report. So we asked participants to give us a sense of where they are in the AI adoption journey, right? In terms of investment, in terms of maturity, in terms of what exactly they have done or they plan to do. And these are the results. A lot of the participants were observed to be in the early stages, either planning or early exploration, some even in pilot projects. And just under 10% had completed. Stephen, let's start with you here. Could you take us through this data? What about it you were expecting already? What about it surprised you? And what do you make of it in terms of trends into the near future?
Cool, sure. I think the first thing to say is that one of the things we always have to be wary of is survey bias, in that if you're running an AI survey, excuse me, you're more likely to get people responding to it who are knowledgeable or interested in AI. So we always have to reflect that. And we also have to reflect that different people will interpret the same question and answer options or responses in different ways too. So, there are two things that we do need to bear in mind before even digging into some of the data detail. I mean, the biggest thing for me was that it did show that, and remember, this is merely for IT adoption rather than business-wide adoption, that most organizations, just over 50%, are still in the early stages, whether it be planning, early exploration or pilot projects. So they're not actually taken their AI use cases that they've built against into production. And that's exactly where we expected the industry to be. In terms of the no investment, again, this is one of those ones that really is, the interpretation can differ across different people, because investment for some people might mean money. For others, it might mean money and time. So, the 12% probably is actually about right. I tend to find with technology, you've normally got a 10%. If you look at ITSM.tools, there's IT service management tools. There's normally 10% of companies that don't have one, or they don't have a fit for purpose IT service management tool. So it's not quite an 80-20 thing, but it's more of a 90-10 thing. The bit that I wasn't quite sure of, and again, this probably does come down to interpretation of the question and also the responses, was the full integration. Because to me, how many organizations are actually where they want to end up with AI adoption, that for most organizations, there's probably something else that can be done as and when resources allow it to be done, or things change and you need to change how you respond to it to remain competitive. I mean, what was interesting out of the full integration responses, I think it was something like 55% of them were actually from respondents who worked for software organizations. So in some ways, you can sort of understand that it is part of the game in terms of, if you're delivering AI-based software or services, then you are going to say that you're using AI to the max in terms of how you operate. So for me, it is a good snapshot of where we are or where we were in 2023. And for me, the key is going to be how this translates into moving from that thinking or planning or piloting the AI use cases in 2024 and moving them into things that actually make a difference to business operations. I mean, one other thing that's probably worth saying as well is, again, it comes down to interpretation, that if your organization is one of the 90% that has an IT service management tool, and I think sort of 75% of those from our research have already got AI capabilities, would you say that you're already in the partial integration phase because you are using an AI-enabled capability in production, or potentially you are? Or would you only respond to this in terms of those things that you've done out with of the, should we call them off-the-shelf packages? This is something unique to your organization that you've created to benefit the way that it works.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And like you mentioned, about 50% or a little over 50% were in the early stages. It remains to be seen what they need to do to understand the implications and the benefits and the security concerns they might have and move to a fuller integration. And to your point about interpretation, I think that's valid. And we future research that we conduct could also include some open-ended, qualitative questions around what they mean, whether they mean they have an ITSM product that's got AI and that they use, and now it's a full integration. No investment. That I'm glad that aligns with what you've seen in general in your experience. Alan, I just want to understand your take on this, and if you feel that things are going to change based on what you've seen.
This is an AI adoption state, and it reflects the nebulous definition of what is AI. And what does adoption mean? Stephen mentioned some of it. If there's a AI branded function within one of my vendor's tools and I've got it implemented and I have users using it, right, have I adopted AI? As opposed to I've got my own development initiatives where I'm trying to build out AI functionality. Maybe it's in analytics, maybe it's in predictive something or other. So there, is it pre-baked into a product that I've purchased, or is it a separate initiative that I'm doing? So I would love to see us dig down into saying, as part of this question, is the adoption related to an existing tool? Like my vendor has already implemented it. If I have an ITSM tool and I've been using it for 10 years, and now they've added an AI functionality to it, have I adopted it, and is it fully integrated? In some definitions, maybe yes. So I think that there's a little bit nebulous nature. The other is, what is AI? And I think that definition is gonna change over time, because I think that part of it is as how vendors are describing it. Part of it is how the media is describing it.
So one open point that's out there that both of you addressed is we don't understand yet by looking at this what some of those applications are. So another question that we asked the participants is, what benefits of AI have they either realized or they anticipate to get from AI? And some of it was not surprising. They'd like AI to take a dump of data and help them make sense of it, and also synthesize actionable insights from it. So essentially, something that a data scientist would have done about 5 years ago, AI can help you do better and better over time. The second most popular was an AI chatbot for self-serve adoption. That's also something that could come baked in within ITSM, and that could be something that enterprises might build in-house. But yeah, essentially it takes a tight integration with your knowledge base and your service management. Another thing that wasn't surprising at all was workflow automation and optimization, right? Essentially, when, let's say, a ticket is raised, right? That's essentially supposed to set in motion all of these workflows. Workflow automation tools have existed for a while, but with AI, there might be more nuanced applications and for instance, text to workflow, or essentially while creating a workflow, it scans through all of the existing workflows, and it tells you which one it might interfere with or might be incompatible with, or what dependencies exist that might break or that you might want to look into while you're setting up a new workflow automation. The applications, basically are just bound by your imagination, as long as it can be done with AI, or in future, certain capabilities come in that help you process a large amount of data and then distill it into a very pithy insight. And some of the other options that we saw was improving employee experience, which you could argue that goes across some of the other options, and optimizing cost and predictive maintenance and security. Now, there were more options that were further down the list. We just picked the top 6. Yeah. So Alan, let's start with you. Does this align with what you had anticipated? Were there any surprises?
Yeah, I think the first one is a surprise. I think that the closer you are to end users' value is what makes sense to people. Chatbots for self-service adoption, even workflows and optimization. It makes sense to me that that's how IT organizations would be thinking. The data analysis and synthesizing is much tougher nut to crack. So, seeing that there are benefits there, because they would actually, optimizing cost and predictive maintenance are part of that. So they're low, but data analysis and synthesizing high. So I'd be curious what they're thinking, what insights they're thinking they're getting out of the analysis, and why they're thinking that that's a big value coming out of it. It's not surprising to me that the things that are closer to, or that less directly impacting users, optimizing cost, predictive maintenance, security, that they're lower. I think they're higher value for the IT organizations and less value in terms of how they think about it for the rest of the organization. Improving employee experience. that was actually it's surprisingly low, because if you should be at, I mean, chatbot and workflows, it should be like 70%. In terms of looking to improve employee experience, because that's really the cutting, the endpoint value of a lot of what that delivers right there. So I'd be curious to see what value they think they're getting out of data analysis and synthesizing insights, and how they would apply it, because that number seems pretty. I'm happy that it's high, because I think there's a lot of value there. I'm just surprised.
Got it. Then in terms of employee experience as well, like you mentioned, that correlates with chatbots, that correlates with a lot of things that could be done to make the lives of employees and end users easier, including, making sure that issues don't happen, as opposed to making the process of getting them reported or fixed more efficient. And we down the line, in a while, we are going to get to what employees feel is a good experience, or good use of AI and Gen AI, and what their expectations are from IT. But yeah, this was interesting to me as well. And data analysis was a surprise first. I have put my money on chatbot and self-service adoption. Stephen, what about you? Were you surprised by these 6? And
Yeah.
I know there were a total of roughly 13 options. Are you surprised some of them are not on here in the top half?
No, I'm not. I'm not surprised that things aren't on here. I mean, like Alan, I'm surprised that data analysis and synthesizing insights, which is a bit of a tongue twister, is top. But the top 3 here are basically what we've seen in other surveys as well. So, often you'll see either chatbot or workflow automation as top, and in some ways we have to think a little bit logically about these answers. I mean, Alan's touched on it already, in that some of the answers overlap. So, as Alan said, improving employee experience and chatbots, do have a sense of overlap, a bit of a Venn diagram, because if you think about it, one organization might introduce a chatbot to empower employees or end users and to improve the employee experience. Another, at the other end of the spectrum, organization might introduce a chatbot to reduce costs. And you probably end up with 2 different beasts, in the same way that you did with IT self-service portals. So I didn't see anything untoward with the top 3, but I think we do need to recognize that level of overlap, and also the connectivity between them as well. So the data analysis and synthesizing insights, which I managed to say again, which surprises me, you might be doing that to improve the employee experience. You might be doing that to understand where to better invest your limited AI investments going forward. You might be using it to assess the relative success of chatbots or knowledge articles, or even, as you said, Sajeesh, that the workflow automation and optimization. So there is a lot of connectivity between those that we do need to be very cognizant of. But for just a snapshot in time from a reasonably large sample, I do think it's reflective of where the industry is. And I think sometimes we can be limited by what we know. So I'll normally run a survey with IT service management practitioners or professionals. So you are going to see workflow automation and chatbot up high. And in many ways, it's nice to see both the AI or intelligent automation being used for both the heavy lifting and also the heavy thinking. So, the more we can use the technology to actually get access to the wealth of data we have within IT service management tools, if we're looking at it through an IT service management lens, the better. That there's so much that we don't know and we should know because we have the data. And for me, that really is where a lot of the, I want to say, unexpected benefits of AI are going to come in for service management professionals that, most of us have seen the videos or read the blogs or even read the books related to intelligent automation. But, the whole sort of data analysis or data science side of things, I think is probably where we're going to see many of the biggest benefits for both IT organizations and the parent companies.
Got it. And one thing that I liked that you mentioned was that chatbots in particular, like there could be a Venn diagram, there could be IT organizations that basically introduce a chatbot to optimize costs and like reduce repetitive tickets and basically scale without scaling the team, so to speak. And uh, on the other side of the spectrum, the reason could be more altruistic, more employee-centric, and there would be arguably IT teams that use it for both. And since we have the data, it remains to slice and dice it, to look at all the people who voted or selected chatbot, and then look at among those people how many of them selected optimizing cost as well, and how many of them selected employee experience. I think like there's a lot we can do with the data, and some of the questions that are bubbling up through this conversation, and also your and our conversation with other industry experts perhaps can be answered if we basically take a microscope to the data and just slice it up.
And
Great.
sorry to interrupt, Sajeesh. One of the things that just dawned on me as well is that this is another one where the respondent interpretation can come into play. So, for instance, improving employee experience. If you have relationships with the HDI in the US, or North America, and the Service Desk Institute, SDI, in the UK and further afield, I've not checked recently, but they were still using the terminology customer experience over employee experience. So if you're very much aligned with either or both of those organizations, and you yourself are treating end users as customers, then if you saw employee experience, you might think that that's something to do with HR rather than IT. I'm just thinking out loud, unfortunately, which is often dangerous, but we shouldn't discount the fact that not everybody would read employee experience and maybe think of it in the same way that we do.
Let me add, Stephen, that an employee-facing, a IT help desk-facing chatbot. So a chatbot that's an assist for the person delivering the service could be included as employee experience as opposed to customer experience as the end user, right? So because that's not listed here, the internal assist.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. Right. And since it specifically mentions chatbot for self-service adoption, I think that could be interpreted as for end users or customer experience essentially. But yeah, if let's say the IT agents have access to something similar that helps them distill the entire knowledge base into one concise answer, and it also stays up to date, right? Like an IT agent might think they know the answer, which has been updated recently. An AI bot or essentially an IT facing chatbot might be able to look at the most recent version of the document and give them the accurate answer. So that's an interesting addition to the questions that we asked. Let's move on to what IT professionals consider some of the barriers to AI adoption. Let's start with you, Alan. What surprises you about what you're seeing here? What was expected?
It's a surprise. Governance and compliance, I think, is probably going to be and maybe we have a Venn diagram problem again. Governance and compliance it does encompass, customer data security, inaccuracy, and consistency. So I feel like that should be higher on the list, because that is where I think some of the pitfalls will be, or some of the gotchas or the traps, as we move forward with adoption. The low hanging fruit is some of these, generative AI use cases, but moving forward, there's going to be issues in terms of, how much data are we exposing to which parts of the organization, and how do we make sure that we're staying in compliance with, in the US, if you're in financial services or healthcare, or, there are lots of data issues. In the EU, I know this wasn't an EU survey, but GDPR and they have an even tighter government. So not that I would have thought it would be higher. I don't think people usually spend their days thinking about governance and compliance. It's not the most interesting or exciting thing, but I feel like it is the most important part of a barrier to adoption. The costs are going to come down. The expertise will be there. Competing priorities, I think going forward, we're not even going to be talking about AI anymore. It's just going to be the latest technology. So it'll become part of the priority. So for me, it's the governance compliance. I think that is probably the biggest barrier, and I think it should be much higher.
Got it. And one interesting insight also is the inaccuracy and inconsistency, that, in other words, hallucination and lack of predictive responses. When you, let's say, like if it's a search engine, that you'll be able to get the same answer if you search for the same thing. With AI, with GenAI, and especially with ChatGPT, that's generally not the case. The lack of reproducibility and hallucinations might.
I'm going to challenge you there, Sajeesh. Though I think that's not a big barrier. That's actually what a lot of vendors and experts are focused on right now. I think that one we're going to get better at that much more quickly than we'll be able to solve for governance and compliance.
Got it. That makes sense. I think governance, we essentially need a body, or like even multiple countries and governments coming together to essentially create certain regulations. But yeah, I agree with you. I've seen vendors, looking at grounding and other techniques to basically remove or at least reduce hallucinations as much as possible. Stephen, what's your read on the data here?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is one of those questions where you never know whether you're getting what people think or what they think they need to think, if that makes sense. So
that does make sense.
It ties in with what Alan says about governance and compliance. Part of the issue is that many of us in our day-to-day jobs, don't really see governance and compliance. It's there, a bit like security in a way. It's there and it protects us, or it should be protecting us, but we're not overly concerned about it. But we probably do see, or at least hear, the fact that we've got limited resources or limited funds. So additional costs is something that we think, or we are told, that we need to be worried about. So we do have that possibility of, again, different perspectives of the same question and responses. One of the things that's not on here, which I found really interesting, just to go off at a tangent for a moment, was the availability of the technology. And I think that scored really low, around about 10%. And correct me, Sajeesh, if I remembered wrongly. So that was interesting, that people felt as though the technology was there and it was these other things. And for me, I like the fact that people are worried about customer data security, because again, a bit like governance compliance, it can be something that, we don't think about enough, unless we've been on an in-house security course, maybe. So, I think in some ways, there was never going to be a right answer to this question, that it ultimately was going to depend on our sample and, what they thought they needed to think rather than what they actually think. Because I think if they were perhaps further along that Gartner hype cycle and getting towards the bottom of the trough of disillusionment, then I think we potentially would see different barriers to AI adoption here. That this is, I say, that the thinking, the thought of that potential future state rather than something more here and now. And, as organizations move along that hype cycle, Alan's right that they really will be struggling with governance compliance. They might even be struggling with the expertise. And again, when you think about the 50-odd% of organizations that are, either planning or, through to pilot, you can do that perhaps with a relatively small team of people who are experts in AI and hopefully the business as a whole. But, as more people need to understand, not necessarily even how to build it, but how to use it and how to refine or improve it over time, I think that's then where we'll really start to see the lack of expertise potentially coming to the fore as well. So I feel as though I'm going around in circles with this, unfortunately, because I think it is just a snapshot in time of respondents who are in organizations who are at a certain stage of AI adoption. And as that adoption goes from not necessarily the theory to the reality, but something akin to that, we will see more of the, should we say, serious business issues or challenges or barriers coming into play.
Right. I agree, Stephen. And like you mentioned, the availability of fit for purpose technology, pretty low. Hopefully, over time, that does remain low because the technology would be abundant. And to Alan's point, the cost also will come down over time. But yeah, a lot of a lot of what we think about customer data and customer data security could be a red letter word that, like if someone just looks at it, they say, that's probably one of the things that we need to worry about or, be cautious about, at least at this point. And go ahead, Stephen.
No, I was going to say with the technology one is probably a good answer or a good example, that it's low at the moment because people aren't necessarily doing the proverbial using it in anger. And what we might find is that rises before it falls, that people are finding that there is technology, but it's not necessarily fit for purpose technology in terms of their particular needs. So, they might have to try different solutions or different ways of working until they actually find out how best to use the technology to deliver against their potentially unique business needs. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes, that it was deliberate use of the term fit for purpose, and perhaps we are not advanced enough at the moment to actually understand if all that technology or all of the solutions that are available are fit for purpose or not right now.
Got it. That's true. And it's also interesting to see another thing you mentioned about some of the folks who are in early stages of AI adoption, perhaps just planning or early exploration. It would be interesting to see whether, if we take that slice of the respondents, whether, something like lack of expertise in the team might rank higher. So just a reminder, we'll be linking linking to the report or a way for you to obtain the report in the description, where we'll go deeper into the data and what it means.
Hi there, thanks for watching. Our discussion went on for over a couple of hours, so we decided to split it into two parts. You just watched part 1. Part 2 is just as insightful, if not more. To make sure you don't miss it, subscribe to the channel and click on the button again to enable all notifications. Bye for now.